What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the next episode. Yikes. I'm not going to start it over. Here we go. We are discussing fats and carbs today. About a 14 slide presentation. I left this one a little bit more open-ended so that we would just have key points of each and then be able to have dialogues kind of break off around them. So instead of it being a full-blown presentation, here it is kind of a base presentation and then us talking about things as the presentation goes on. Everybody get that? Cool. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. And then we will get started. Okay, can everybody see the screen? Yes, here we go. So I wanted to condense carbs and fats into one presentation because, to be honest, macros are kind of boring, but they're important. So we got to learn the basics and go over these for everybody else and ourselves before we transfer over to the more fun stuff. So let's dive in. Okay. I'm going to kind of do this the same way we did protein. So what really is a carbohydrate and how do we utilize them? So carbs are a macronutrient. Certain foods and drinks, sugars, starches, and fiber are all forms of carbohydrates. Sugars, starches, fiber. Now, contrary to a lot of ideologies on Instagram and social media, you do have to track the carbs that come from fiber. That is a question that I do get asked fairly recently for some reason. All calories, all fiber, all macronutrients, they're all energy. They all need to be tracked. All this net carb bullshit, no. So if your clients come with you with that, no, we track total carbs of everything. There's some people saying like total carbs minus the fiber is your full. I don't even know what it is because it's that ridiculous. So anyways,
it's like total carbs minus the fiber minus sugar alcohols
equals what the carbs
equals net carbs.
And we wonder why we have an obesity epidemic. Anyways, one of the primary functions of carbs is to provide your body with energy. Most of the carbohydrates in foods you eat are digested and broken down into glucose before entering the bloodstream. Fairly straightforward. Your cells convert carbs into the fuel molecule ATP through a process called cellular respiration. So ATP is short for adenosine triphosphate. And this is also what creatine will help replenish in muscle stores when we're training. Because when we contract a muscle, ATP or glycogen depletes. So having carbs around your workout is going to help us keep those replenished. Creatine can help those replenish as well. We're going to get into timing of carbs and utilization of them later on in the call. Carbs are muscle sparing due to them being the preferred source for breaking down into glycogen as opposed to amino acids protein. Remember last week we talked about this, amino acids getting broken down into glucose. Who remembers what that's called?
Glucogenesis.
Yep, glucogenesis. Audrey's learning. Let me tell you what. She's in a master's. She already knows all this. So carbs are muscle sparing and can prevent muscle protein breakdown. I think it's also, I don't know if I noted this or not, but carbs can also reduce cortisol. So having carbs in intra-workout can actually help reduce cortisol if somebody's a higher stress individual. That's a big component of why we want carbs post-workout as well. So it can kind of offset that cortisol spike that happens. They're fucking delicious. Spiking of insulin can be very beneficial when utilized efficaciously. So what are two scenarios that you guys can think of where spiking insulin is going to benefit us? It's a collective. Go ahead, Audrey.
Pre-workout.
Pre-workout's a great one. What's the next one? Somebody else.
Post-workout.
Post-workout. Those are going to be the two most optimal times of the day to spike our insulin. Not to say that outside of that. Lauren, are you on the call in my house?
Damn it.
I gotta mute you. Yeah. So this isn't to say that like insulin spike throughout the other parts of the day isn't beneficial. It's just going to be the most beneficial when we're actually going to be using those carbs for an ergonomic effect. Carb intake has a direct correlation with thyroid function, specifically the conversion of T4 to T3. Without carbohydrates, that conversion does not happen. So if we see people, the keto warriors, I don't know if there's actual true data around this, but what I've found is typically when we keep somebody under 70 to 80 grams of carbs chronically for an elongated period of time, thyroid is going to stop functioning. Now, if we're on, if you guys aren't going to have, well, some of you guys are going to have competitors, but if we have trace carb, trace fat clients going into a prep, I'm usually going to have some form of 100 carb-ish bump up every couple of days, at least once a week. I'm always going to keep that in there. I'm not just going to keep somebody super thrashed. While they're on that, I would definitely have thyroid support in there as well. But that's just the correlation between carbs and thyroid. So if carbs are super low, we can definitely be utilizing other supplementations to help the thyroid support itself. Any questions on that? Cool. What exactly are fats? So we're rolling flip-flop here. And why do we utilize them? Fats within the body are critical for storing energy, maintaining body temp, cushioning vital organs, regulating hormones, transmitting nerve impulses, and transporting fat-soluble nutrients. Fats in food provide a condensed energy source and promote satiety. Who knows, who has an interpretation of what a condensed energy source means? What does that mean?
I guess it like takes up less space.
Yes. Fats are very calorically dense. So they have, fats are the slowest digesting. So they cause the meal to digest slower as a whole. We'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah, they're condensed sources of energy. So think of like a really, really dense ball that you light on fire and it has to burn up all the way. The denser that ball is, right? If it's hollow, it's going to burn up super quick. If it's dense, it's going to burn for a lot longer. Does that make sense? That was probably a terrible analogy, but that's all I could come to my head right now. Fats, fatty acids, lipids, triglycerides, whatever you want to call them. Fats in our body are made up of 3 molecules joined together, which is why it's called a triglyceride. Tri is 3. Fats are the slowest digesting macronutrient. We just said that. They have the highest caloric value per macro at 9 calories per gram. Crucial for hormone regulation and health. They actually can help lower your bad cholesterol. So healthy fats up, LDL cholesterol will go down. And these are absolutely necessary for us to be able to absorb fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. If your client, I actually think it was, I actually want to say it was Audrey who noticed this when she was in prep, because I was just going to say, if you are having clients who have an absorption issue of some of their vitamins, you'll see discolorations of the skin, the eyes, even the teeth. And Audrey was on prep and started having fats with her breakfast and noticed a significant difference in how white her teeth got within like a couple of days, I think, right?
Yeah. So I was taking my vitamins in the morning with my breakfast, and my breakfast had like 3 grams of fat, and my teeth, the bottom of my teeth right here, started going see-through. And then like for like a week, I switched over to a higher fat breakfast with my vitamins and they came back to normal. It's pretty wild.
Pretty freaking crazy. So I actually was on Instagram Live and somebody asked me the question, how many fats are necessary in a meal in order to absorb fat soluble vitamins? And I want to say it was 6 to 8. So like there's like a minimum threshold when you're taking your vitamins with fats that you need at least 6. I would just say 8 to make it safe, because I don't exactly remember, but it was either 6 or 8 grams of fat in order to actually be able to absorb those fat soluble vitamins. So that's pretty important for your clients who take all their vitamins with breakfast. Let them know, hey, pretty much going to be wasting these vitamins unless we're having at least 8 grams of fat in there. And then higher satiety with them in meals, which for me, I prefer higher fats in breakfast because that satiety kind of pushes throughout the whole day. And then the other meals kind of like bounce it as it goes. That's just me. Any questions on this slide, you guys?
I just had a question about the whole vitamin and fats situation. So if your overall fat intake is like pretty hefty, do you think you have to worry as much about like taking those vitamins with a higher fat meal, or do you think like if your fat intake for the day is higher, you're probably okay with absorbing vitamins?
So the 2 trains of thoughts here. Yours makes a lot of sense, but also we have to look at probably like metabolization of fats in the body. And if we're needing to take so essentially, let's look at it like this. If we have water soluble vitamins and we go, well, I drink a gallon of water every day. And when we wake up in the morning, we pop all the vitamins in our mouth and we just swallow them dry. and don't drink any water for 30, 40 minutes, did we probably absorb those or probably not? You know,
Yeah.
so there could be an argument here for either side, which is a great conversation topic right now. But if I don't know, I'd rather be sure.
Right.
You know
Okay.
what I mean? Okay. Carbohydrate metabolism. So we're going to kind of get a full depth because there's 3 different parts of carbohydrate metabolism, and I'm going to go over all 3 of them with you guys. In my personal opinion, this is not a crazy in-depth amount of like knowledge that we need to do our jobs better. It's cool to know, it's cool to understand, but knowing the full process here is not going to make you do your jobs any better, in my opinion. It might, if that's the way you learn. So carbohydrate metabolism is a fundamental biochemical process. This is straight off of Google, so that I got it right. That ensures a constant supply of energy of living cells. The most important carbohydrate is glucose, which can be broken down via glycolysis, entering the Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation to generate ATP. Okay, so carbohydrate metabolism broken down. You can write this down if you want. You can just listen. Again, I don't think it's something that's make or break it for you guys with getting clients results. So glycolysis is a cytoplasmic pathway which breaks down glucose into 2 3-carbon compounds, and then it generates energy. Glycolysis is used by all cells in the body for energy generation. Okay, makes sense? Pretty easy. Krebs cycle. This is step 2 after glycolysis is being used for energy operation. It's the sequence of reactions by which most living cells generate energy, right? So the first one, cells are generating energy. The second one, the sequence of reactions from them generating energy during the process of aerobic respiration. It takes place in the mitochondria, consuming oxygen, producing carbon dioxide and water as waste products, and then converting adenosine diphosphate to energy-rich ATP. So think taking the trash, turning it into energy, right? It's a recycle bin. And yeah. Oxidative phosphorylation is made up of 2 closely connected components, the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. In the electron transplant chain, electrons are passed from one molecule to another, and energy released in these electron transfers is used to form an electrochemical gradient. Jesus, I'm so sorry. An electrochemical gradient. So basically, energy is produced, reactions of energy produced. Now it's an electrochemical gradient. That's the breakdown. Any questions on this? Cool. Fat sources and why they are important to monitor. So we have saturated fats here. These are dominantly found in dairy. What's up, Mason? Dairy, animal meats, etc. I don't know if this knowledge is still, or this claim is still like valid in today's age, but I know like 2-3 years ago when I was doing a lot of research on this, saturated fats have been deemed as like bad. Like they were like, you do not want saturated fats in your diet. You want to keep it low. There's a ton of evidence supporting saturated fats with supporting the liver, lungs, brain, immune system, nervous system, endocrine system. And like, I personally feel like my athletes can have up to 50% of their daily intake coming from saturated fat source, butters, meats, cheese, things like that. Now, dairy intolerances obviously play a role here. I'm not going to tell somebody who's lactose intolerant to go eat a pound of cheese because they can hit their fats with it, right? That'd be an absolute nightmare. But I do prefer to push, and you guys, if you're on the protein call, you know this, I prefer to push, quality meat sources of protein very, very high here. Unsaturated fats is a type of fat that contains a high proportion of fatty acid molecules with at least one double bond, considered to be healthier in the diet than saturated fat. These are anti-inflammatory fat sources. So in the other call, I think it was the client deep dive call, because I think we talked about a couple clients and pushing their fats up and going more anti-inflammatory fats with them. I'll do this a lot if I have somebody coming off of a prep, if we are having to turn hormone, like support hormones coming back on, if progesterone's been downregulated, if estrogen's high or low, I will usually up the healthier fats or the anti-inflammatory fats. Also on these monounsaturated, polyunsaturated omega-3, 6, 9s. That's going to be the full circuit or the full circle of unsaturated fats here. And then trans fat. Don't need to touch on this one too much. This is fat that has been changed by a process called hydrogenation. So you guys heard of hydrogenated fats and oils? It basically, the only purpose of these is preservation of shelf life. So they're basically making the plastic as possible so that I can last on the shelves as long as possible. It's processed food and bullshit. I recommend staying away from it. And I'll say, if you have clients who, like, if you can't really trust your clients in the sense of like they're newer, they don't really know what they're tracking or how to eat, they're just kind of like, oh, I fit whatever I can into my macros, and they start having some digestive issues, or they start looking a little bit more puffy and inflamed, I'll typically look at their food log and I'll see if they're having like higher levels of trans fats and processed foods. And more oftentimes than not, that's what's going on. Any questions? Cool. Carbs in excess. So this is somebody let's just say you've been reverse dieting somebody for X amount of time. We've pushed their carbs up through the roof. What are we going to see now that we are at this position where we have carbs in excess? So you're going to have poor insulin sensitivity or insulin resistant after elongated periods of carbs just being in excess. Everybody understand that, right? When you eat carbs, you spike insulin, you eat more carbs. Over time, you need to eat more carbs to get the same amount of insulin spike, and then eventually your body's not very responsive at all. So with that, carbs in excess will cause a physique to retain water. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we see this a lot. Let's just say we've got Jess eating 400 grams of carbs. If I pull that down to 250, she's probably going to flush a couple pounds of water just in that first week, just from not having the excess amount of carbs there, because carbs will hold water a little bit. Okay. If we've had carbs for too long or for too high for too long, usually the athlete's not able to get pumps in the gym. There's not really a good blood flow indicator going on. If they're like, man, I've been training, my training kind of sucks, I can't really get good pumps, I feel lethargic, that's a pretty sure sign of insulin resistance. And, obviously blood glucose transportation is not happening. And then fasted blood glucose is high. If we're getting labs done, fasted blood glucose being high, almost always. I prefer fasted insulin with this as well. So for my like markers like this, fasted insulin, fasted blood glucose, and A1C are what I'm going to look at here. Anything over 90, I don't really like to see. I love high 70s, love to see the high 70s, but anything mid-range of the 80s around there, I deem as a good fasted blood glucose level. 90 up, I start going, okay, let's make some adjustments here. Any questions on these? Or is there something else that you guys think that we see when carbs are in excess that you want to add? It's a collective. Okay, let's move on. Good ways to reset insulin sensitivity or support it. Carb cycling is pretty much number one here, in my opinion. Carb cycling leads the trend for me in regards to regulating this. So my goal is, yes, we can reset insulin sensitivity, but my goal is also how long can we go before we need an insulin sensitivity reset? Yeah. So carb cycling, there are many different ways you can do this. You can do 3 low days, 2 moderate days, 2 high days. If I do something like this, sometimes I've kept it consistent and said, let training days fall where they will. I would probably say majority of clients would benefit from having their 2 high days on a training day, their low days on a rest day, and then the other moderate days on another training day. You can go 3 days low, 1 day high, and just rinse and repeat like that. You could pretty much do anything you wanted to around this. My personal one that I go to the most is 3 low, 2 moderate, 2 high throughout the week. And this is usually more so just when somebody's dieting. So I'm not really needing to worry too much about insulin sensitivity, but it can help a lot of other functions here. So we'll go based off of if somebody's in an excess amount of carbs. So mini cuts, AKA pulling carbs down. So we're in a caloric deficit overall. So I think this is a big mistake that people make, or not a mistake. I guess I think this is something that people overlook when they're trying to reset insulin sensitivity, is they're not actually pulling clients into a deficit, because to the best of my research and knowledge, a deficit needs to be in place here for us to reset insulin markers. Okay. So if their maintenance calories are 1,800 and they're eating a 2,400 calorie surplus, and we pull back carbs a ton, but they're still at 1,900 calories, we're probably not going to see as amazing as an insulin reset, right? They need to be in a caloric deficit. So anything under 1,800. We can also just start utilizing glucose disposal agents. New Ethics has a really good one. It's called GDA Max. It's what I will use for people if I need to reset insulin markers. But again, I'm not just going to throw in well, I mean, you could throw a GD8 in if they're in a surplus of carbs. Again, I like to have as little moving parts as possible. I'd only really prefer to use this if I need to use it. So while I'm pulling them back into their deficit, we can throw in a GDA with, each carb meal throughout the day. So they've got carb meals with 1, 3, and 5. So we just do a GDA with each of those meals to help that insulin reset a little bit better. We can add in cardio. Cardio in itself improves insulin sensitivity, specifically HIIT, right? HIIT and, I mean, all of them do. HIIT and LIST both improve insulin sensitivity. HIIT would definitely improve it substantially more, but then we have to worry about recovery and, all of those sides there. I'm not a huge fan of HIIT. I prefer to hang out with LIST more for my athletes. And then this is kind of the same principle as carb cycling, but you can just lower carbs on rest days. So depending on where calories are, let's just use Jess for an example. She's on 400 carb, 60 fat on training days, and on rest days, we just pull 100 carb. We might even be able to get away with pulling 150 because she's still going to be in a surplus. If our goal is growth here or reverse dieting, she'll still be in a surplus, but we'll at least pull back enough carbs here for appetite to be in a good spot. And then there is a little bit of a carb cycling protocol there, even though she's not fully getting into a deficit on those rest days. There's still some regulation and fluctuation of that carb intake that can help us be able to push carbs up longer before we hit into an insulin resistance issue, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily going to correct, right? Because we would need to be in a deficit for that. That's just what I've found subjectively works. So are there any questions around this one?
Yeah. So why, is your reasoning for liking LIST more than HIIT just purely recovery reasons?
Yeah. I mean, LIST has been shown to improve recovery in the first place. It helps with blood flow, circulation. I think it improves digestion more oftentimes than not. HIIT is just a lot more intense. It's a lot more demanding on the body. So if I have somebody going in and training a leg day, and then I'm having them do 15 minutes of sprints after that, they're going to be very sympathetic. There's going to be a lot of stress uptick that happens. They're going to be burning a lot more calories for a longer period of time. Appetite can shoot through the roof from this type of stuff. So for me, it's like pick my poison. Do I want to have them do HIIT cardio and then their appetite be ravenous, or can I get away with LIST, burn some solid calories, and keep them not as ravenous so that their diet's a little bit more monitored? There's a lot of moving parts for that. I'm not saying the HIIT doesn't work. If I have an athlete getting ready for a show and they are falling behind, HIIT cardio will definitely speed up fat loss, in my opinion. I just prefer to keep that as a trump card if I need it.
Cool. And one more. What does GDA stand for again?
Glucose disposal agents.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Cool. Let's move on. When to prioritize carbs and the benefits. So pre, post, and before bed. These would be the three tiers that I would say if we're going to prioritize carbs, I would prioritize carbs. Pre-workout, we're getting glycogen stores full. If glycogen's full, ATP stores are full. It's going to give you energy for training. We're going to get an insulin response. So those carbs are going to go directly where they need them to go. Remember, insulin is a shuttle hormone. Post-workout, pretty much the same thing. We want that insulin response high so that the absorption of meals is improved. It's going to lower cortisol, and it's going to start replenishing the glycogen that we depleted during our training. Before bed, this is case dependent for sure. Now, I want you guys to know, I recommend carbs before bed, and later on down the slide, I'm not going to recommend fats before bed. So I'll talk about that one on the fat one, but carbs in general, I mean, I'm sure you guys have eaten like a nice big bowl of oatmeal laid on the couch and just immediately like, oh man, I could pass out right now. So carbs really help, especially if I have somebody who's having a hard time sleeping. I'll be like, yo, save like 40 grams of carbs and have some carbs before bed. On top of that, having carbs in our system before bed, they've done a couple studies on this, then seen a 2000% spike in their growth hormone, because growth hormone spikes when we sleep. So they've seen it spike by over 2000% as compared to somebody who doesn't eat carbs before bed. So with this, if we're eating carbs before bed and it's helping us sleep better, that in turn is trickling down and helping us burn fat better. So with that notion, carbs before bed can actually make you burn more fat, right? Anything that's going to improve sleep will help us burn more fat. Okay. Any questions on this? Pretty straightforward slide. Cool. When to prioritize fats. So we talked about this earlier. Breakfast, number one here, help absorb fat soluble vitamins, help with that satiety, and then also start our day off with some anti-inflammatories going into our system. So I'm always a fan. You guys saw the circadian rhythm one. I'm always a fan of starting our days off the least stressful and the least inflamed as possible, because that sets the tone and carries out through the rest of our day. I like prioritizing fats pre-workout. Back to the notion of them being a condensed energy source, they will burn for an elongated period of time. So if we pair a quality fat source with a quality carb source, your body is going to use those carbs as this preferred energy for glycogen, but the fats being paired with that meal are going to help that whole meal digest slower as a whole, and just think an elongated use of energy stores. So it's going to be able to burn off through your entire workout, instead of if you just had a Rice Krispie treat and you're 20 minutes in and you go, shit, I can't even get a pump. I'm gassed. Does that make sense? Makes sense? Cool. I prefer fats as low as possible post-workout for the same reason, right? I want that meal to digest quick. I don't want that meal to digest slower as a whole. So I'm going to remove fats post-workout. And then for that exact same reason is why I don't prefer high fats before bed. They are very, very slow. So we'll say hard to digest. They're very hard to digest. Movement is a huge part of our digestion. That's why I recommend walking after each meal. So if we're having, the most famous one for people that I have is when they're having digestive issues is oatmeal and peanut butter before bed. You know, a big bowl of oats, a ton of peanut butter. I'm not saying that everybody who eats fats before bed is going to have digestive issues, but I will say probably 8 out of 10 clients that you come across with digestive issues when they wake up, it's because of what they're eating before bed. So if we're having something going in that is super slow digesting, and then they're not moving at all and they're just laying there for hours, that meal is going to end up sitting like a rock in their stomach. And you wake up, your digestion's off, you usually get a little frustrated. Now us waking up peacefully and starting our day off in a parasympathetic state is gone. Now digestion is going to be offset for the rest of the day. Does that make sense? So it just ends up being this like repeating cycle over and over and over again. They go, God, I'm just always bloated. And they go, oatmeal, peanut butter, sleep. God, I always wake up bloated. I mean, if you always wake up bloated, let's see what you're doing before bed and probably switch it. Sometimes. Moving on. How do we know which one to increase? So we have a client, they're pretty much baseline carbs and fats. They're at maintenance calories. Let's say, for example, here, let's say we've got Nicole at 160 protein, 160 carb, 45 fat. And we're going, okay, do we increase carbs or do we increase fats? So this is a huge critical thinking and individual adaptation approach that needs to happen here, in my opinion. So what I mean by that is, same notion, what makes the most amount of sense, but also what does the individual respond to better? And you may not know this with a starting client. You may not, they might not even know this. A lot of you guys are going to have lifestyle clients who've never tracked before. So this is where you just can kind of see what happens for a couple of weeks. Some athletes will respond better to and like higher fats. That's supposed to say some. Higher carb. 9 times out of 10, I think carbs are going to be the better choice here for majority of clients. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say that increasing carbs, I like the amount that I increase carbs is going to be significantly more than I increase fats. Basically, that's going to be 9 times out of 10 for people. Fat range can be a personal meter you create for yourself. Because as you guys know, I don't like females to go below 40. I don't like men to go below 50. That's my own personal stance on these things. For me, I personally don't really love to see fats higher than 80 to 100 for men if they're a hard gainer, and usually not much more than 60 to 70 for women. I've done 80, 90, etc. I don't see much of a positive return in regards to digestion. And then in a surplus, fats can be stored as actual body fat a little bit easier. So those are some things to keep in mind there. Carbs, I can ramp up plenty. So I've had females at 400 carbs, but I've also had other females only be able to push 200 before we see insulin resistance set in. Again, this is going to be individual adaptation. Each client's going to be different. And carbohydrate metabolism is something that can be improved, or I guess increased over the course of time. So if we have somebody who, like, this is just kind of the whole premise of reverse dieting, right? If we have somebody who reverses up to 400 carbs and then they can drop weight and get lean on 200 carb, and then they reverse to 500 carb, and it's like, then I can eat more carbs. And while yes, that's true, I don't like to see carbs super like pushed to the max for a long period of time, because the insulin resistance issues that can happen, but also just the demand on your pancreas to produce that much insulin for elongated periods of time, because your body is very adaptive. So if I have somebody push in 400 carbs, say Audrey push in 400 carb for 12 weeks nonstop, I don't cycle them off, her pancreas is going to get used to producing that amount of load. And then if I immediately drop to 150 carb, the pancreas still thinks it's got a job to do. So now we're overproducing insulin. If we overproduce insulin, well, once all glycogen stores are filled, that insulin says, well, we got to put this somewhere. Its first choice is fat tissue. So that's where you can see an anomaly where you drop a lot of carbs super quick and somebody's weight goes up and they start looking worse. So we gotta teeter those things down, or we gotta use ebbs and flows, higher carbs this day, lower carbs this day, like we talked about in resetting insulin sensitivity. So moving on, I got 2-part slide to this. Ecto, meso, and endomorphs respond to carbs differently. So if you guys know, ectomorph is the skinny guy, mesomorph is the guy we all hate because he looks amazing all the time. Endomorph is the guy or girl who is more heavier set, more thick. So ectomorph, I could probably feed these people carbs all fucking day. Mason's the definition of an ectomorph. Dude, the dude can eat literally 15 cheeseburgers and wake up a pound lighter. Like you're gonna have those clients where it just doesn't make sense. Mesomorphs, right in the middle, I've seen these people be anywhere across the board. They could grow on very little. Like I can have them in a reverse diet on 250 carb as a guy, and they're putting on muscle mass, getting good pumps, everything in between. And then I drop them to like 200 carb and they get shredded. I literally hate these guys. It's so annoying. Must be nice. Honestly, it must be real fucking nice. And then endomorphs are going to be your more heavier based people. They're going to be a lot more sensitive to carbs, increasing out the gate, and probably won't be able to ramp them up as high for either process or desire. So like if they want to reverse their, if I want to eat 500 carbs, it's like, look, I got to be honest. You're going to be lucky if you get to 300 without putting on body fat. It's just how your body is. Now, we're not going to sit here and say like, oh, my body is so, my body's carb resistant. If I eat carbs, I blow up. It's like, well, no, you just eat a shit ton of them. And that's why you blow up. So being able to, also kind of come back and identify, is this client ecto, meso, or endo? Okay, so that might make more sense why when I'm pushing her carbs up or his carbs up, he's, his lines are starting to blur a little bit faster and he's starting to look like he put on body fat a little bit more. Does that make sense? Any questions on these 2 slides? Really? Wow, I thought for sure I was going to have some questions on this. Okay. So how much to increase by? The golden question. I'm increasing my clients' macros. How much should I increase each macro by? I personally go for calories overall here more than anything. I don't go for like, well, you can, if you've got somebody at a good place and they're just like, oh, hunger's a little bit better, you can 10 carb them. Those are the types of little things. If I have somebody in like a good solid surplus that we don't really need to do much monitoring on for a good while, and appetite goes up, you can 10 carb them. If they're a guy, you can 25 carb them. Keep it simple like that. I don't really dive much deeper if they're already in that higher caloric range. But for females, usually we can get away with a 40 to 70 calorie increase per week consistently and adapt just fine. Meaning every single week we're bumping up or subtracting 40 to 70 calories. Okay. We're just talking about increases here for this one, but 40 to 70 calories. So some can handle more, some can handle less. That's always going to be individual variance. But this could be 10 carb increase. This could be a 5 gram fat increase. You could do 5 grams fat, 5 gram of carb increase, whatever you want to do to kind of be in that caloric range. And like I said, I have my kind of like sweet spot relation with fats, right? But let's say I have fats at 60, but I've got carbs at like 400, that might be a time where I go, you know what, like if I'm looking at them ratio wise, carbs are significantly higher. Maybe we'll bump fats up this week because I don't need to be pushing that carb ceiling much higher because we're probably just going to get a negative response there. Yeah. Critical thinking. Males, I typically see handle a higher range. I could do 200 calories or so for most of them, depending on where they're at in their caloric range. If they're further into a surplus, less aggressive increases, just kind of like what I talked about. So for the 200 calories, you could bump a dude up 50 carb, 20 fat. And if they're in a decent calorie range near their maintenance, you can bump up food pretty damn quick for males, even more so if they're enhanced. If they're utilizing PEDs, I could do 90 carb bumps and they're fine, but it really just depends on the person. Again, monitor their response every time. So we do a 200 calorie increase for a guy, or we do a 70 calorie increase for a girl. And then the next week we see, are the lines fading? Are the lines improving? Are they satiated? Are they hungrier? Like there's all those feedbacks that you can see. And this is why, actually we should do a call on what to ask for in your check-ins. That would be an in-depth one. I'm going to do that one next week. Thanks for that idea, guys. We'll do that one next week and why they're important. But yeah, kind of monitoring their body response after these increases to make sure if it hit them right or hit them wrong. And this is what I'm talking about earlier in the slides, where some clients respond better to fats, some clients respond better to carbs. If I bump up Nicole's carbs 10 and her lines fade significantly that week, I go, whoa, that's a little weird. Let's pull those carbs back down. Let me see. And then if the next week her lines are back to normal and improve, I go, okay, that's pretty weird. Let's bump up fats 5. And then she looks the same or looks fine, and go, okay, she's probably at her carb limit right here. She's probably at that level where if I push up carbs much further right now, we're just going to start losing lines. She's just going to start putting on body fat. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you can also improve that range by having times of diet breaks, reverses, all that stuff. You can push up that carbohydrate metabolism over time. Questions and or dialogues?
I have a quick question.
Yep.
So when you said, as far as utilizing fats, certain meal periods, I have clients that kind of like a really good range. So post-workout, I say the same, keeping fats minimal. Like what would you not exceed, I guess?
That's a really good question. So I kind of based this. I don't think there's really like a true data point around this where we can say anything over this, your post-workout meal sucks. I base it off of the range that I researched of vitamin absorption. So if I need roughly 8 grams of fat to absorb these vitamins, that's probably the range that's going to make my meal digest slower as a whole, if that's what I need for absorption. So I'm going to try to keep my clients with a post-workout meal under 8 grams of fat. Okay. That's my thought process. I don't know if anybody else has a different interpretation of that data, but that's just my thought process surrounding the whole thing.
The same thing for carbs before dinner kind of thing. You'd say under 8 grams if you have people.
You mean fats before bed?
Or sorry, yeah, fats before bed.
Carbs before dinner. I love having carbs before dinner personally.
Fats before bed, sorry.
Yeah, fats before bed. So this one is really just like, let's see what their digestion can handle. Because like me, I could knock out 4 tablespoons of peanut butter in bed and be fine in the morning. So there's some people, they have 5 grams, 10 grams of fat, and they're bloated. Okay, let's pull it. I'll say there's usually a correlation with fiber as well here. So fat and fiber are both variables I like to keep low before bed. But if somebody's going to have, oats and peanut butter, or let's just say to lower the fiber, they say they have cream of rice and peanut butter, so there's no fiber in it, and that's helping them sleep better, their digestion's not off, I'm not going to argue. If it's oats, so look at it like this. If somebody has oats and peanut butter before bed, and I'm like, yo, that's what's bloating you. And they're like, well, I'm not going to give it up. I go, okay, why don't we switch to cream of wheat or cream of rice? And let's see what happens. And if they do that and digestion improves, cool. It was probably just the fiber content and from the oatmeal going in before bed.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So you can just kind of play around and monitor with their bio response from there.
Awesome.
Anything else?
Yeah, so I have a question about a specific client. It's kind of based off the same carbs and fats. So it's basically, she's having a nose surgery next week, and she's going to be out of the gym for a little while. So I was kind of wanted to know I didn't really know how to approach the situation since she's going to be out of the gym. And she's been in a pretty hefty surplus for, I would say, about like 8 weeks now.
Okay. What are her current macros? What's her current macros look like?
She was at 350 carbs,
Jesus.
60 fat, and 150 protein, I believe.
Damn, that girl eating, bro.
Yeah, and she's not gaining like very much fat tissue
Really?
at all.
Bitch. Here's my stance is, especially when we have bodybuilding goals, whether it's a lifestyle client or a bodybuilding athlete, if we're not training, we do not need that many carbs. We just don't. So I personally, if she's going to do a surgery, her appetite's probably not going to be there anyways for the first couple of weeks. I know when Allie had that nose surgery, I was basically shoving little pineapples down her mouth so she could chew something. I usually put the first week post any surgery, I usually say just eat what you can. I say prioritize protein first, however much your appetite's depending, because more than likely she's going to be on antibiotics, and that's going to throw her digestion off, and then she's not going to have an appetite at all. So I wouldn't really set a macro or caloric range coming out of a surgery. I do this a lot with my clients who get breast augmentations. I'm just like, eat what you can, prioritize, decently balanced meals in each, just so we're getting a little bit of everything. But as far as an actual set goal goes, I don't know if it's realistic, because I don't know, if her appetite's even going to be there, but I would definitely drop carbs a pretty hefty amount. I mean, I'd probably drop carbs to 200 and just hold her there, whether she's, and she's just resting. Body's going to use extra calories to aid in the recovery process anyways, and she's still going to stay in that surplus. So we're not pulling, hundreds and hundreds of calories off into a deficit where we're going to have hormonal down regulations either.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just asking because you had said earlier, if you pull them down too far, you could see a negative response. So pulling down, as long as she's still in that surplus, it should be fine.
Yeah. So if we had somebody, just to refer that, if we had somebody on 400 carb and then I immediately drop them to 100 for a prep, I'm probably not going to see a good response. Yeah. If I'm at 400 and I put them down to 200 and they're still in a relative surplus, it's probably not going to be as detrimental. I prefer the taper range. I'll drop 50, 50, 60 like that instead of just dropping a full 100. But, again, majority of you guys probably aren't going to have prep client timelines for that type of stuff. But I don't really like unless I have an athlete who needs to put on a substantial amount of muscle mass, I'm not going to push food high. And when I first started coaching, I would push food so high with my clients. It's almost it's like an accolade. Everyone wants to post oh, well, I have this girl eating 500 carbs. I'm like, God, her poor fucking systems, dude. Jesus Christ, that sounds miserable. And the more I've come into just researching and kind of trying to drop my ego and not think that I know everything, if you're having to push somebody's food that high and they're still not growing, there's usually issues elsewhere. More food, if more food isn't producing the result, more food isn't going to produce a different result, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Does anybody else have any other questions? Lauren, I know you got a question. I can feel it.
I have a question. With resetting insulin sensitivity, is intermittent fasting something that can help with that?
Yes. I don't love intermittent fasting unless it just fits my client's lifestyle. Like I wouldn't have, like, I don't think it's very conducive to bodybuilding, but like, I'm not going to have a client eat, I'm not going to have you eating in a surplus and then just be like, cool, let's just start intermittent fasting to, you know what I mean? Cause like, that's an entire lifestyle change that we're hitting just for some insulin sensitivity. Like, let's just drop carbs a little bit. Now, if you have a client who is intermittent fasting already, I have found I don't need to push a client's calories up as much for them to grow if they're intermittent fasting. It's usually not going to help us because you only got like an 8-hour eating window. If I have you at 500 carb, like that's damn near impossible. Growth hormone, there's a couple benefits, right? Like growth hormones spiked for longer up until you eat because growth hormone spikes when we sleep. And then once we eat and break our fast, it kind of comes back down. So the whole thought process behind intermittent fasting being like amazing for muscle building is that they keep growth hormone longer, but also we could argue you're not getting amino acids into your body. You're not spiking muscle protein synthesis. So therefore you could be promoting muscle protein breakdown, right? Both of them work, right? Intermittent fasting works. I used to do it. Would I have my competitive roster intermittent fasting? No. But as a means to use it for insulin sensitivity, I have found that I see I'll see less roadblocks of insulin resistance if they're intermittent fasting, but also we're not pushing food as high either. Could be a correlation, could not. Anybody else? And we will sign off. Cool. All right, dudes. Well, thank you. Replay will be posted. My Wi-Fi made it through the whole thing this time. I'm going to stop the recording right now. Catch you guys next week.